From ancient rituals to modern-day spiritual movements, religion has been one of the most powerful forces in all of human history. I mean, it shapes entire civilizations, it sparks conflicts, and it gives meaning to billions of lives. But if we step back and look at it like a sociologist, what is religion really? And what does it actually do for society? That's exactly what we're going to unpack.
And really, it all boils down to this one fundamental question, one that sociologists have been wrestling with for over a century. Why is it that, in every single culture, across every single era, we humans create these belief systems? Why do we take certain things, ideas, places, objects, and set them apart as sacred, as something special, something different from our everyday lives?
To even begin to answer that, we have to go back to the beginning. We've got to look at the classical thinkers who were the first to try and scientifically figure out where religious belief even comes from in the first place.
You know, these early sociologists and anthropologists had some pretty wild ideas. You had Herbert Spencer, who suggested it all started with dreaming about dead relatives, which led to believing in ghosts and spirits. Then E.B. Tylor argued for something called animism, this idea that everything, even rocks and rivers, has a soul. Malinowski saw it as a coping mechanism, a way to handle emotional stress, like, say, performing a ritual before a dangerous voyage. And then Max Muller thought it all grew out of how we poetically describe nature, which then evolved into these huge, complex mythologies about sun gods and storm gods.
Now, these origin stories are fascinating, for sure, but they mostly focus on what's going on inside an individual's head. For sociologists, the really big question isn't just where did belief come from, but what's its function? What purpose does it serve for the entire community? And this, right here, is where the major debates truly kick off.
So let's bring in one of the founding fathers of sociology, Emile Durkheim. For him, where the belief started was way less important than what it did for the group. And in his eyes, religion was the ultimate form of social glue.
Durkheim's entire theory really hangs on this one crucial distinction. He argued that every society divides the world into two separate domains. You've got the profane, that's our normal, everyday, boring stuff, your job, your chores, the commute. But then you have the sacred. These are the things that are set apart as special, powerful, even forbidden. And it's not just about gods. The sacred can be a place, an object, an animal, or even an idea that the community agrees is worthy of reverence.
Okay, so here's the key. When a whole group of people shares the exact same idea of what is sacred, they develop what Durkheim called a collective consciousness. It's basically a shared set of beliefs, morals, and attitudes that acts as this powerful, unifying force, binding individuals together into one single moral community.
So, for Durkheim, here's the mind-blowing part. When people are worshiping the sacred, what they're really worshiping, without even knowing it, is the power of their own society. The rituals, the symbols, all of it just reinforces those social bonds and keeps everything in order. Religion isn't just part of society, it's the very foundation of it.
But not everyone saw religion as this positive, unifying force. Oh no. Thinkers like Karl Marx and Max Weber came along and painted a very, very different picture, one that's all about power, conflict, and radical social change.
And this brings us to one of the most famous and controversial quotes in all of sociology. For Karl Marx, religion wasn't social glue, it was a powerful drug. It was a painkiller that dulled the suffering of the oppressed, but crucially kept them from seeing the real source of their misery.
Marx argues that religion creates what he called false consciousness. Basically, it teaches the working class to just accept their poverty and their exploitation as a test of their faith, or as just part of God's divine plan. It promises them all these rewards in the afterlife, which distracts them from fighting for a better life right here, right now. So in this view, religion is just an ideological weapon, used by the rich and powerful to keep an unequal system in place.
Okay, so we've got Durkheim's unity on one side and Marx's oppression on the other. But there's a third major perspective. What if religious ideas could actually spark massive revolutionary change? This is where Max Weber storms into the conversation.
Weber completely flipped the script. He argued that a very specific set of religious ideas from certain Protestant groups were actually the engine that created modern capitalism. First, you have this idea of a calling, which turned work from just a job into a moral and religious duty. Then, you've got the doctrine of predestination, which created this deep anxiety about who was saved, leading people to look for signs of God's favor, like, say, being successful in business. Put those together, and you get a super disciplined, rational, hardworking person who reinvests their profits instead of spending them. And that, Weber said, was the spirit of capitalism.
So here you have it, the two great competing views on religion's power.
For Marx, religion is fundamentally conservative. It keeps things the same, protects the powerful, end of story. But for Weber, religion can be this radical engine of change, powerful enough to build whole new economic systems and create the modern world as we know it.
Okay, so you might be thinking, this is all fascinating history, but what about today? Well, these classical theories aren't just history lessons. They give us the exact tools we need to understand our incredibly complex modern religious world, which, let's be honest, looks a lot less like one big church and a lot more like a vibrant, sometimes chaotic spiritual marketplace.
Now, to make sense of all this diversity, sociologists have a really handy way of categorizing things. First, you have a church. That's a large, established religious organization that's pretty well integrated into society. A sect is usually a smaller group that's broken away, often in protest, and it lives in a lot more tension with the mainstream. And finally, you have what used to be called a cult, but what sociologists now prefer to call a new religious movement, or NRM. This is usually a more loosely organized group with new beliefs that often clashes with the surrounding culture.
And this is so cool because it shows why those classic theories still matter so much. Why do these NRMs pop up? Well, think back to Weber's idea of disenchantment, that loss of magic in a cold, rational world. People are searching for that meaning again. Or think of Durkheim's anomie, that feeling of normlessness. People are looking for a sense of community in a world that can feel pretty isolating. You add in modern individualism, cultural protests, and globalization, and you've got a world where people are basically shopping for beliefs that fit their own personal needs.
So what a journey, right? We've gone all the way from seeing religion as the unquestioned glue holding an entire society together to a modern world where it functions much more like a marketplace of spiritual options. Religion hasn't vanished, not at all. It is just transformed, perfectly mirroring the changes in society itself. And that leaves us with one final big question for you to think about. If the role of traditional religion has changed so much, what, if anything, has taken its place? In our modern, supposedly disenchanted world, what do we treat as sacred? Some sociologists talk about civil religions, things like intense patriotism, or our obsession with consumer brands, or even a devotion to science. Think about it. What rituals do we all share? What symbols do we hold in reverence? That's the kind of question these incredible sociological tools empower all of us to explore.